Our first reading is from Acts chapter 2, verses 2 through 13. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. And suddenly from heaven there came the sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues as of fire appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages, as the Spirit gave them ability. Now there were devout Jews from every nation under heaven living in Jerusalem. And at this sound the crowd gathered and was bewildered, because each one of them heard speaking in the native language of each. Amazed and astonished, they asked, "Are not all of these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear each of us in our own native language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and the residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt and other parts of Libya belong to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs. In our own languages, we hear them speaking about God's deeds of power." All were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, "What does this mean?" But others sneered and said, "They are filled with new wine."
The second reading continues from the first. But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them, "Men of Judea, and all who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen to what I say. Indeed, these are not drunk, as you suppose, because it is only 9 o'clock in the morning. No, this is what was spoken through the prophet Joel. In the last days it will be, God declares that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. And your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even upon my slaves, both men and women, in those days I will pour out my Spirit, and they shall prophesy. And I will show portents in the heaven above and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and smoky mist. The sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood, before the coming of the Lord's great and glorious day. Then everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved."
I was leading a congregation. It was still pretty new. We had moved from the first place we met was at Cafe Da Vinci, and we were meeting in a comedy club down at the other end of the street. I think it's Funky Trunk Treasures now. It used to be Bonkers, right? Or now it's a photo place. Miss Preppy Pants. It doesn't matter. It used to be a comedy club. And so we decided that we weren't going to meet on Super Bowl Sunday because people wanted to go and go to Super Bowl parties. So instead, I wrote a blog post that week that basically said, this is what our culture is doing. This is what our culture has said, is valuable. So rather than us sort of going to church as this defiant, like, oh, we don't think you should go to the Super Bowl party or whatever, I just said instead, you go to the Super Bowl party. I think that's probably where Jesus would have been hanging out, not in the temple, and like he might have even had a beer with his friends. One of my best friends at the time, his mom went to a more conservative church and found this blog post and lit me up in this comment about how as a leader I was leading people astray and I was going to be judged so harshly for blah 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 da da da. And I just always think it's funny because and I don't know how often this has come up in conjunction with the Super Bowl, but the stuff in the text about assuming they're drunk just is always funny to me. And the part of the experience question to me when I read this through a few times, that's sort of what jumped out to me is how sensory the experience was. And the text sort of sounds like if not a Super Bowl, it's at least like a halftime show. It's loud and crowded, and it's sort of sensory overload, and people are amazed and perplexed, not at the football, but at the commercials. And then there's the assumption that everybody's drunk. So it's very much like the Super Bowl. We're talking through, and I think, is this the last week, the second of last week? Different beginning stories throughout the course of the Bible, and drawing out reflections on the nature of how it is that we begin, not as something that's externally imposed, but instead that we choose to internally cultivate. So it's not based on circumstances changing, but how we decide to kind of form ourselves. And the framework we've been using for the last number of weeks that we'll kind of use tonight is to sort of look at the text, talk about the context, ask some questions, and then move into practices. Heather.
The Pentecost story today and the Spirit
Yeah.
and everything. And
So the jinn.
And then, the jinns in Islam, they're the spiritual arm of Islam.
Yeah.
As well.
Oh, I was thinking
Was that-
gin like liquor.
No, but
That's also something I tried.
right. You've got the being jinn,
Yes.
being spirit.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's your.
Yeah, jinn. That's where the word genie comes
I
from.
mean, I meant to.
Obviously, wisdom. So the text, we've talked a lot about the text, and we can kind of jump back to that if we want to. The context is, and I think a couple people said this, Jesus has died. The stories are circulating that he's been raised from the dead. There's still not a lot of clarity about what this little movement should do. And so that's sort of where the story happens. You've got stuff from the Gospel of John where he makes these promises about the Spirit that will come after him. That's not necessarily in all the other Gospels. But the other way far background that I think is important just to mention, and I may get into this a little more next week, is the parallels to the story of Babel. And so in the story of Babel in Genesis 10:11, you got people who get sort of full of themselves and they try to become like God, and they all come together in one place and they try to build a tower to the heavens and become like God. And the story is that God humbles them or humiliates them by confusing their language and sort of scattering them into the earth. And this was like the ancient explanation for why people speak different languages. But then in the Pentecost story, sort of the opposite thing happens. You have people come together and they're all in one place, but they're speaking different languages and are enabled to understand them. And they have this communal spiritual experience where they can then hear and understand and speak in languages that allow them to communicate. So instead of scattering to humiliate them, there's a sense that they've been empowered. And this is a part of this understanding that they're sent into the world to share this Jesus thing with everyone, this movement, this way of life. We've already sort of kicked around a lot of questions, and what I want to do is kind of shift into thinking through the formation side of this and what practices might be like, and I think those will raise some of their own questions, and we'll do this a little more conversationally. And I just want to jump in and do a handful of these that are pretty obvious. So the first practice is be together. I think the opening of the story is probably one of my favorite because it's so simple. They were all together in one place. And there's a lot more going on there because of the context, especially those who are part of the movement and their leader, their teacher has been killed. They're not together for a Super Bowl party to celebrate. They're together because they're afraid. And they don't know what to do and they don't know where to go and they're, that kind of thing. But they were all together. And I know we've got a few people online, but I think over the course of the week, usually a lot, another 40 or 50 people will watch. So I want to say this to the online community because it's been a while since we've said it. The text says they were all together in one place, and I think that's another binary. We sort of view the world in terms of here, there, physically present versus virtually present. And I want to say that we don't always do it super well, but what we want to be about is the understanding that digital presence is real presence, that there's not an understanding of sort of value for people in the room and second-class citizenship. I got to find the camera so I can look at you. Hey, Ashley, by the way, I know she's online. So this is what Kathy's doing here. This is why Kathy does what she does, even though she wasn't able to make it tonight, last minute, she had something come up. But the idea being that for the online community, we think you're here with us, but more than that, we don't think that you have to come to us. We also think we're there with you, wherever you are. That's part of what we're doing in sort of the technology here. So digital media helps us sort of mediate the presence and bring us together. The point being, when we say each week, thank you for being here, your presence makes us who we are, we mean that. And we don't just mean that for people who are in the room, but the way that the online community shapes what we're doing. So be together, check. Second one, and I'm going to have Caitlin come up. Caitlin and Kathy were both supposed to kind of be in our panel discussion thing tonight, but Kathy wasn't able to make it. Is she online yet? She is not. Okay, she's still driving back from Merritt Island. I don't know why I pointed at the screen. It doesn't do anything. Listen. Nope. The second practice, listen. So this is both profoundly moving and also difficult for me. In the story, before they listened to a sermon, they listened to each other. Before they listened to a sermon, they listened to each other. okay. Before they listen to a sermon, I have to say it to myself a few times so I recall the value of you guys talking to each other. And we had this really cool intergenerational event today, and it didn't need to be organized. We didn't need to run icebreakers. We didn't have questions that we handed out.
Did you miss that?
People are able to just relate to each other. They can just have a conversation, and it was neat to see that happen without there being sort of a need for any prompt. So,
But next time, matching T-shirts for sure.
just so everybody knows which church we come from, make it awkward, fill the playground. So what I want to do tonight is have this conversation, and sort of in place of a sermon. So tonight we're going to sort of talk to each other and curate some conversation for a little bit. And then next week, this will hopefully take more of the shape of a sermon. Maybe. But we'll start with tonight. And part of the reason is we didn't have Occupy this week. And what I've realized is I don't like preaching without having Occupy. I don't like not being able to crowdsource with you guys. And Jim sent me a long email I haven't even read yet, but if you were here last week, I basically preached Jim's thoughts. So if you're waiting for that will be next week. I'll work that into next week's sermon. But there is, it's been neat to sort of realize this week, there's so much value in what I get from you all at Occupy that it feels really weird to write a sermon alone, to try to sort of process through that and think that my voice can represent the voice of the congregation. So anyway, take it away. What do we got first?
You have a question to click to.
Oh, where's that?
There it is.
Yes, there you go.
Cool. So the idea was that in the reading, it talks about young people seeing visions and older people dreaming dreams. And as the resident intergenerational person, or so I'm told, I thought I'd share some stories about what I've seen that looking like, and then we would hear from the room about what that means to you, especially if you identify as a younger person, whatever that's relative to, or an older person, whatever that's relative to. I gave some of you a tip-off that there would be questions.
Some of you are old.
Oh, I'll call you out if I think you're old. I'm just kidding.
They tell me I'm old all
You're
the time.
not on the list, Christina, don't worry. Anyway, so Jerry, conveniently you do come up. You're not hearing too well? How are we doing on that mic? Is that a little better? Is that clearer? Okay.
Just hold it like that tiny little microphone.
I'm gonna, this won't be awkward at all. What?
Go for it.
All right.
Roll.
Oh my goodness, the peanut gallery. All right. So yes, we definitely had an intergenerational event this morning. And the really cool thing about that is that at some places when you say intergenerational, what people hear is this is a kids event. And if you don't have kids, you shouldn't be here. And that is not how you interpret it. And that is awesome. I really love just like a hand to all the kids who are awesome, but also to all the older people who show up to try to help raise them. Like, seriously. And I love that. And I think that speaks to a common dream, that we have a dream that we don't have to be siloed, that we don't have to live without relationships across generational divide. I mean, there's so much generational trash talk these days that I love that doesn't seem to be present here at all. I don't experience it here at all. But I had a couple stories from things that have been going on around here lately. And so one is collective students. If you don't know, last July we kind of kicked off having programs for middle school and high schoolers. And when we started that program, I had a number of parents come to me and say, hey, we have a child with special needs in some way. And we want to clue you in and tell you what it would mean to accommodate my kid and to make this a space that works for them. And I was like, all right, tell me everything you know. Like, let's basically make an IEP for your child to make sure that they have a good experience. And I mean, the nerves that the parents had for the first program we had, I mean, they hung out here to make sure it went well and to be there in case it didn't. And we have an awareness that we have a larger number of children with special needs than your average. And yet, we haven't had a problem. Not one single problem. These are students who sometimes have trouble at school in whatever way. They have trouble socially with their peers. That doesn't happen here. And I think it goes back to something that was said in that very first program. We said, I said, what do you want this this kind of group to be for you? What does the community statement look like for you? What do you need? And they said, somebody said, acceptance is important for people my age. And someone else said, no, acceptance is cheap. We want to belong. And what then happened was that, as far as I know, none of the kids went out of their way to say, oh, that person has this special need, and we're going to accommodate that in this way. No, not at all. I think they focused on belonging, what they needed, and what they wanted to offer someone else. And what we've seen happen is that we've created a community for them in which everyone shines in their own way. Everybody's able to make their highest contribution. If you heard about our escape room antics lately, we would not have been as successful as we were without our students with special needs, because they had an acute sense of logic, and they had an incredible ability to communicate something none of the rest of us would have seen. And just the idea that we've been able to build a community, that they've been able to build it, I can't take credit for it. It was their openness, their willingness to listen, their adaptability with each other has built a community in which those students actually have a safe place. It's not school, it's not a slog. They don't get reported onto their parent because there isn't a problem, because they're not a problem. It's been incredible. And then
They beat the Wesley House kids, right, at the escape room?
They did. They stomped them soundly. The Wesley House kids. No, I took same escape room, same everything. I'm sorry, Katie.
Sorry, Katie.
We're just curb stomped.
Representing.
No, we in 1 week I took the group twice, and I took my college kids first, and it took them 59 minutes. At 60 minutes, you fail. Like, that's how escape rooms work. Collective students beat it in 47. Like, stellar.
Yeah. It's about winning here. It's about being better than others.
It is. So my next story is about how awesome my college students are. This is really cool. It's getting cooler. Some of you have heard about our experience a few weekends ago. We took a group from Stetson to the big Methodist camp in Leesburg. And it was two things. It was both all the Wesley foundations in the state of Florida coming to camp together to have a retreat weekend together, but it was also College Connection, which is a retreat for high school juniors and seniors. And they're coming to find out what college is like, what campus ministries are available at those colleges. They're kind of like a college fair, but like with Jesus in it.
So awkward.
Just read my face. So we were asked to do a workshop for them, for the high schoolers. And I didn't like some of the recommendations. And so we did one on encountering diversity and difference in college, because that seemed to fit kind of our skill set. And something that I think a lot of people are surprised by and really need walking into college, to adjust their expectations and to begin to think through, what is my identity and how do I articulate that well? And how do I ask people respectfully about differences? And so we're leading this workshop, and in the first one, I get pure fear in my gut as soon as the person starts talking. And then it turned beautifully. This person said, some of the things you've pointed out about identity, I'm from a really conservative part of the state, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'm not sure I agree. Like, I'm not sure that I believe in different gender identities. But I want to be respectful, and I want to love people like Jesus loved people. Can you tell me how to do that, even if I don't agree? And we were like, keep asking questions that way. That would be a great start. It sounds like you're already doing that. It sounds like you're already figuring out how to express that kindly. And so I saw the student panel respond really beautifully to that tough question. And then we get into our second workshop, and what should happen, but that in the process of sharing, we're asked, well, how many campus ministries are open and affirming? And I said, I can't speak for the others, but ours is. And this person came out as trans in our workshop. And that moment, that space, that community was the first time that person had ever been in an open and affirming Christian space and experienced the miracle that it is to be able to be both queer and Christian in the same place, authentically, fully themselves. And I am still getting teary. And our group was just so emotionally impacted by what that feels like. I'm sure some of you in the room know a lot what that feels like. And I did ask permission. Aiden's online right now. And is really excited about maybe having some part in our community, and is chatting online to kind of be present with us tonight. And welcome, Aiden. And when we finished our service that night, we did a service for all the college kids, and they loved it. We finished with All Falling Into the Dark, and it was and I had a number of young women kind of come up to me, and they were really touched by some of the things I said and some of the ways I pushed back on what has become normal church for them, I guess. And one young woman shared that she's from Colombia, and she came here when she was about 7, and she loves the Christian tradition, and she loves the church, a lot of the people in it. And what has been striking to her, and that she had never heard someone say before, was how many resources go into churches building big churches. Coming from a place where not everybody has everything they need to eat, which of course is also true in DeLand, but going into something and then seeing all these resources pulled into bigger buildings and more people and empire building. And she was starting to put words to what it means for the church to actually contribute to the good in their neighborhoods. And she came up to me asking for a reading list, and I was like, this is good. This is awesome stuff. So that's something of what I've been seeing in the visions of young people lately. And when it comes to older folks, I think the really cool thing about older people in my life is the ways in which they kind of already know what those visions can be and how they can participate in them. And so that's a ton of folks who, their kids, if they had them, are long grown now, and they're coming to intergenerational events, and they're participating in the lives of children here. It's, no offense, Bill, maybe you're not older, but it's relative. It's Bill finding out that we got access to the Wesley House and going, can I come in and teach your students how to meditate? This enthusiasm to participate. I have a lot of beautiful women in my life who come to me through my Codependence Anonymous group. And when I told them that Stetson doesn't have any recovery groups for young people, that they don't have peer mentors in getting clean and sober, or addressing codependence, or working through alcoholism in their family, things like that, they said, oh, we'll drive to DeLand to help you start that. We'd love to help you do that. And it's people like Jerry coming to Collective Cares so that he can learn more about that community and be informed about what it needs. I feel so much action out of the older people in my life. And I feel just this excitement to jump in and participate in what younger people are doing. And if Dan's right, I'm told that it's how you stay young. So tell me, if you consider yourself a younger person, what kind of visions are you seeing? And if you consider yourself an older person, what kind of dreams do you have? That's for the room, just so you know. Or if you're older, like, what motivates you to connect with younger generations?
It's not just their energy. Young people can be incredibly intelligent and insightful. And we think because we're older, we've got it all figured out. We don't have anything figured out, but a lot of young people tap into things that you may have forgotten because you're no longer young. And their questions are questions you should still have. And they are amazing. And they are insightful. And they're really funny. And that will keep you young, for sure.
Amazing, insightful, funny. Go on.
You. That's you.
Bill.
Go on.
Should I interpret that? No.
I'm sure I'll hear about it later. These people know
No,
where
we,
I live.
Bill, we said dreams, not hallucinations. We're done. Let's go.
I took my meds today. One of the things McLaren mentions in his book is having teach-ins. And when I was your age, we had teach-ins.
Back when the dinosaurs roamed.
Back when we wanted to change society. And it didn't change as much as I want to. As Sue says, I'm tired of protesting this shit all the time. but it changed enough that we didn't get jailed and we didn't get killed for protesting. But there's something about raising consciousness, spread, I don't know how, but I see not too far down the road what we're doing here in Multiply. Whether it be in DeLand, outside DeLand, I don't know, but that more people having access to this kind of openness and willingness experience strength and hope.
Yeah. Did anyone else? Yeah, Steve.
We kind of cheated. We just adopted one. But it does put us in between. And this is, I guess I'm just saying thanks for having this place where we can be older and still be connected to other people who have kids. It kind of puts us in between. We sometimes feel like we've got the same stuff going on with a teenager, and yet we're grandparent age. But I think a lot of folks are finding themselves in that position.
Well, but it's I'll speak for you. It's not just that you adopt into it, because you also were at Lunch and Learn and talking about how it is that you can be directly involved in activism in our city to make things better. So it's not like you need a young person in order to have this vitality. Like, you still also see that, you've got that dream and you're working on that just as yourself, and then are also tapped into the literal youth of sort of the crew here. But I think it's both and, for sure. Jerry and then Jim.
I heard, I forget where it went, but somebody pointed out with this passage that it kind of reverses things, that young people usually have dreams.
Yeah.
I hope to become,
Yeah.
yada yada. Old people have the mountaintop, as Dan described, the perception. Older people are supposed to have the perception, the old man on the mountain who's seeing everything. And this reverses it. And what I'm feeling lately as an older person, doing what young people do, it's like learning. I got new things to learn. I got places to go. I got things to learn. I got people to meet.
Yep.
It's like that never happened before,
Yeah.
And also, I was a whole lot older when I was young. I was very, very grim, serious, older. And as I've gotten older, I've gotten more in touch with what young is supposed to be.
Growing bolder. Well, I listen to a little NPR. I dabble. Jim.
When I saw the second question, I thought that the dreams I have are nightmares.
God, I love collective. Go on.
I mean, our political climate gives me nightmares. The dream I have is that actions always generate reactions. And my dream is for a huge reaction to occur, a reaction that promotes the things that we've lost, inclusion, civility, kindness, and so forth. So, and it's largely up to the young people to see that dream come true.
Yeah. But they're looking for examples, so I think that's important. One more, Freddie, I'm going to put you on the spot. We get to go to the clergy conference this week for Faith and some of the stuff that they're doing. So you seem to be sort of a young guy. What visions do you see?
Visions do I see?
Yeah. Like, why do you do what you do? What keeps you organizing?
We keep track of the numbers as far as the amount of children that are arrested in the state. And on Friday, the new numbers came out. We realized that our county leads the state in 5 to 12-year-olds being arrested, grade school age. We're number 1. We have a vision for living in a community where kids can be punished by their parents and learn discipline without a lifelong criminal record.
Yeah, so, wow.
I once asked Freddie if he felt like he was doing like the work he dreamed of. And instead of responding like, I like my job or something like that, he goes, oh, not nearly. We have so much we have to do before I'm doing the work I want to do. I think it's really cool, Freddie, that you think of your work in terms of human progress, not in how you spend your time.
Yeah, and if we think about what our community is doing as sort of the fun and self-congratulatory work of like innovating theologically and having, subversive and kind of radical conversations and challenging what we used to believe with what we want to believe, but we miss that vision, if we miss that crystal, like I could give a shit what you believe about God, if our congregation can't do something about 5 to 12-year-olds getting records, what are we doing? If we can't hear that, then we can't hear anything. Rob? Yeah, bring it.
I don't see this positivity. I'm surrounded by 6th graders that I could totally understand why they would bring a gun to school and start shooting people.
Yep.
You say parents parenting them. I sat with a bunch of 6th graders and I don't know what was going on Friday, but the floodgates opened. Mr. Stevenson, my mom is in jail again. Mr. Stevenson, my dad's gonna hit me if he finds out I have this. Like, we have this rosy view. My kids don't have visions, they're in survival mode. And they're 11. And they're bright, and they're gifted. Their vision isn't college, their vision isn't being positive like Jesus, it's, can I get to school so I can get food?
Yep.
And I know I see a very different perspective of poverty. I understand why they steal, I understand why they fight.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to fix, or trying to improve, is that I know they have access to guns. And I know they have, in their minds, probable reason to come and bring guns to school.
Yeah.
And they don't have a line where someone says, okay, someone in your mind disrespects you, you don't shoot them. They don't have that line at home, because that's why dad's in jail. That's why mom's in jail. So, I don't know, I don't see the rosy.
Yeah, well, and I don't think you need to. I mean, I think part of what we're saying is, and what we always say is, this is much more complex than any simple fix, or we would have fixed it. I mean, there are reasons that our county is in the state that it's in, and I think, if there's something that Christianity historically has failed at, it's at getting really excited to address symptoms without addressing problems, or to vilify symptoms and thereby insulating problems from ever being addressed. And so I think, we have to hear both. We have to hear sort of the abject horror of the fact that there are 10-year-olds whose vision is, can I get to school and get food? And we have to hear the vision of young organizers who think that there's a way that we can change it. It's got to be both.
It was very strange to have my daughter in my class because the other kids were like, wow, your dad pays attention to you. Your dad knows what you had for breakfast. Your dad, is he?
Yeah, you had breakfast.
Right. And I mean, on one hand, she's not here, it's kind of nice that she's moved to a different class now because it doesn't put that pressure on her. You have a family.
Yeah.
So it's not even necessarily getting the 12-year-olds to not get arrested. It's showing parents how to be parents without abusing their kids.
Yeah. Which requires fixing the economy. Which requires, I mean, it's all tangled up. We got some work to do.
Allie had something.
Oh yeah, Allie and then David.
For a good part of my adult life, other people have referred to me as a nihilist, and they usually mean it in a derogatory way, like you're not a good person because you have this glaring character flaw that you're a nihilist. And now I've kind of grown up and I'm a science fiction writer, semi-professional, and it's kind of my job to see like nihilistic visions of the future. Like that's an entire genre that's exists for almost 100 years. It's something people keep getting paid to do. So it's, sometimes it's not bad to see bad visions of the future or have bad dreams. People get paid to do it. It's not like a character flaw if it's negative.
There's also an entire tradition in the Bible called the prophets, which is some beautiful nihilistic visions of the future, like if we don't get right. Yeah, absolutely. All right, David and then Heather.
So here's a little bit of a rosy. Some of us in faith, as an organization, are meeting with the local police chiefs and the police departments and the sheriff in the next 60 days, confronting these issues. So that's what's going on too.
Yeah.
Number one. And I think to back it into the experience concept here is I've had a lot of experiences, as others had within the charismatic kind of stuff. And the bottom line, you've heard me say this a few times, am I more loving as a result of that?
Yeah.
And generally speaking, my experiences had not made me more loving. They're experiences. And so the self-confrontation is, okay, so what kind of experience will make me more loving?
Yeah.
And this place does it for me.
Perfect segue. I'm gonna do this because we've gone longer than expected, but that's also sort of expected because we're doing conversational things. So I'm gonna transition through a couple things, and we'll come back, like I said, to this next week. So to your point, the last practice I was going to talk about was experience things, and I think that we don't maybe think about that as a spiritual practice. And part of what I mean by that is that embodied spirituality matters. Our human experiences are a gateway to spirituality. And just sort of reading through the story, we've got loud sound, they're seeing fire, they're feeling wind, they're maybe smelling smoke, tasting booze, or at least that's the sort of accusation. The point is, again, it wasn't primarily a cognitive, objective belief, theological, orthodox sort of exercise. They experienced something. That experience was transformative, and it was their experience, not a religious sort of understanding apart from it, that was their spirituality. It was the experience that was the spirituality. Bewildered, amazed, astonished, incredulous, perplexed is not language associated with intellectual exercise. It's language associated with an experience. So when it comes to Eucharist, you are probably not surprised to learn that and it's even in collective, I've had this conversation with lots of people, trying to nail down a singular objective meaning for the Eucharist. And so I've heard from lots of people over the last 5 years, like, well, I don't take it because I don't understand it. Or I don't take it because I don't know what it means, and I don't really know what I'm doing, and I don't want to do something like that if I don't know what I'm doing, which I get. I respect that. Or they'll just flat out say, I don't do it because I don't believe in it. Or like I do it only when I believe in it. Or the most often, the question is, what does it mean? And the question is like, makes the assumption there's a singular meaning. Like, this is what it means when you come to the Eucharist, and it's built on, I think, this generation's old Christian theology, that at the end of the day, what it is a transaction. And if we can explain the transaction, what do I have to do and what do I get? Then it'll be like, oh, well, that's what it means then. I pay the money and I get something back. Instead, the question I think we always ought to be asking is what happens? What is it that we experience when we come to an open table? And not just this table, but what happens when we go like to the dinner groups? What happens when we come to a table at the park in the middle of the day? What happens at that kind of open table? They're all together in one place. And this is, David and I have been coming back to this a lot recently, sort of the simplicity of the Christian tradition to gather the people, tell the story, break the bread. Gather the people, tell the story, break the bread. Gather the people, tell the story, break the bread. Oh, wow. Still, somebody get a video because they make great GIFs. Somebody did a GIF of me doing that. It's the best. The point being that the table that we set is not one of agreed upon ideas. We don't set a table of shared theological precision. We don't set a table of objective beliefs that create boundaries so that if you do believe, you get to come. If you don't, you don't get to come. Instead, we set an open table. We say that every week, that it's an open table. It's a table that invites and it validates and it invites us to share our human spiritual experiences. Throughout the Gospels, especially in the teachings of Jesus, we hear this described as a feast or a banquet or a potluck of human spirituality, where who people are and their experiences of the world and their lives are validated and they're shared together. The table of this experience and embrace is set for us, but not only for us. As always, it's open for us and to all people, and no one will ever be turned away. So when you're ready, feel free to come and grab a piece of bread and dip it in the cup.